Only the fire's steady crackle punctuated the deep quiet. A rhythmic counterpoint to the crickets, distant chorus and the leaves, soft rustle overhead. Uncle Ben, a picture of tranquil authority even on a fallen log, slowly extended a long, stout branch. He used it to ease a smoldering log deeper into the embers, launching a spiral of sparks into the inky blackness above. Each tiny orange comet seemed to hang suspended for a fleeting moment before vanishing. The flickering light danced across his seasoned face, deepening the lines around his gentle eyes, rendering him both ancient and vibrantly present. "All right, gather round, folks," he rumbled, his voice a low thrum that effortlessly pierced the tranquil night. An unspoken command resonated in his tone, a subtle gravitational pull drawing everyone nearer. The flames offered a welcome warmth against the crisp evening air, and the mingled scents of pine and wood smoke filled the space, a primal fragrance. "Got a good fire going now, perfect for a story or two, wouldn't you say?" A ripple of agreement spread through the small group. A few younger campers, their faces still flushed from the day's exertion, shifted with anticipation. Even the older ones, long familiar with Ben's narratives, leaned in with an eager reverence. He possessed a unique gift for weaving words, transforming the mundane into the extraordinary, and the terrifying into chilling reality. His gaze swept over each face, pausing briefly on the more nervous individuals, a silent acknowledgement. "Now, I know some of you are expecting the usual fare," he continued, a faint, dry smile playing on his lips. "Fairy tales, legends passed down from grandpappy to grandpappy. The kind that give you a momentary fright then dissolve with the morning light." He paused, letting the implication settle. "But tonight's a little different." A hush descended upon the circle. The fire maintained its rhythmic crackle, a heartbeat in the deepening silence. "See, the woods, they hold secrets," Uncle Ben began, his eyes drifting beyond the circle of faces, into the impenetrable darkness beyond the fire's embrace. "Things that defy easy explanation. Things that make you question everything you thought you knew about the natural world." He picked up a smooth, small stone, tossing it idly from hand to hand. "And tonight, I'm not going to tell you stories that might have happened. I'm going to tell you about things that did happen." A sharp intake of breath came from his left. A few pairs of eyes widened, mirroring the dancing flames like startled embers. "These aren't campfire yarns spun for a cheap thrill," he clarified, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious. "These are true accounts. Encounters that left people transformed. Encounters that remind you just how fragile the veil can be between our world and something else." He looked at each person again, his gaze steady, unwavering. "And they all happened right here, in places not so different from where we're sitting now." The wind, previously still, suddenly stirred through the high branches, creating a sound like a whispered warning. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, coursed through the group. The initial anticipation had morphed into something heavier, a palpable tension. "The wilderness," Uncle Ben continued, his voice resonating with deeper tones. "It's a beautiful, majestic place, full of life, wonder, and profound peace. But it also harbors things we don't understand. Things that can observe you from the shadows, things that leave prints unlike any known animal, things that make sounds that are neither truly human nor truly beast." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. "And sometimes if you're unlucky enough, or perhaps in some strange twist of fate, lucky enough, you might just stumble upon one of them." He paused, letting the full weight of his words sink in. The cheerful crackle of the fire now seemed to acquire a more ominous quality, each pop and hiss a potential prelude to something lurking just beyond the light. The comfortable circle around the flames felt suddenly like a small, fragile island adrift in an ocean of unknown possibilities. "So if you're looking for a tale to lull you to sleep," Uncle Ben said, his voice a low, compelling murmur, "you've come to the wrong fire tonight. Because these stories, they'll cling to you long after the embers fade. They'll make you regard every rustle in the bushes, every snapped twig, every distant cry, a little differently." He leaned back against the log, a master of ceremonies poised to unveil his true spectacle. "Are you ready for that?" No one spoke. The only response was the collective gaze, fixed upon him, a blend of apprehension and an undeniable primal curiosity. He smiled, a genuine, unforced expression with a hint of mischievousness. The stage was set. Shadows deepened, and the campfire's glow became the sole beacon against the encroaching unknown. Some folk see woods as little more than trees and critters, Uncle Ben rumbled, his voice a low thrum that echoed the wilderness itself. He leaned forward, eyes like warm creekstones glinting in the firelight. But the truly ancient forests, those that have witnessed centuries, they hoard secrets. Whisperwind Woods. It's one of them. Beautiful, yes, but profoundly old. And sometimes, ancient things don't favor disturbance. He paused, allowing the forest's silence to press in, broken only by a distant owl's hoot. This next tale, he resumed, a faint tremor in his voice, concerns a girl named Lily. She was spirited. Not magical precisely, but her curiosity hummed, always pushing boundaries, always yearning to glimpse beyond the next ridge. She adored the woods, yet her love sometimes verged on recklessness. Lily, he explained, had spent her entire childhood exploring Whisperwind's fringes. Each summer, her family rented a small cabin on its eastern edge, and with every passing year Lily ventured deeper, her imagination ignited by rustling leaves and dappled sunlight. She knew wildflowers by name, recognized hidden birdsongs, and could track deer by faint impressions in soft earth. Yet one frontier remained unconquered, the heart of Whisperwind Woods itself. A dense, shadowy expanse where local legends spoke of unseen entities, humming with a strange, low frequency. Her parents, understandably, were wary. "Lily, it's too deep in there," her mother fretted one sweltering August afternoon, brow furrowed. "No trails, no clearings. What if you get lost?" "I won't," Lily retorted, chin jutting with characteristic stubbornness. "I have my compass, my map, and I can read moss. Besides," she added, a mischievous glint in her eyes, "I want to see the whispering pines. Everyone says they sing." Her father, usually the more pragmatic, tried a different tack. "It's not just getting lost, sweetie. There are bears, and, well, it's simply not safe alone overnight." But Lily was relentless. Weeks were spent researching, presenting articles about experienced solo campers, meticulously packing and repacking gear, even demonstrating knot-tying prowess. She drafted detailed maps of her proposed route, highlighting water sources and emergency exits. She promised a satellite phone, hourly check-ins, and to pitch her tent only in designated open areas. Finally, worn down by her persistent, reasoned, and slightly dramatic pleas, they conceded. With strict caveats, of course. One night, no more. Stick to the outer, less dense sections, and if anything at all felt amiss, she was to return immediately. Lily beamed, her triumph outshining the morning sun. The day dawned crisp and cool, a perfect late summer morning. Her backpack, heavy with essentials and a few comforting luxuries, felt reassuringly solid. She waved goodbye to her parents, a confident smile fixed, and stepped into Whisperwind Woods' shadowed embrace. The initial hours were everything she'd envisioned. The air hung thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Sunlight fractured through the dense canopy in shifting patterns, illuminating patches of emerald moss and scarlet fungi. She observed a deer family grazing peacefully, their ears twitching at her approach. A profound silence enveloped her, broken only by the rustle of unseen creatures and the distant murmur of a stream. She discovered a perfect clearing for her camp. Nestled beside a cluster of ancient gnarled oaks, it felt secluded, yet open enough for comfort. With practiced ease, she pitched her tent, unfurled her sleeping bag, and kindled a small, crackling fire, as dusk began painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. As twilight's last vestiges faded, and the first stars pricked the velvet darkness, that's when it began. A low, almost imperceptible vibration at first. Like the distant hum of a power line, or the faintest thrum of a refrigerator. Too low for insects, too steady for wind. Lily tilted her head, listening intently. It seemed to emanate from everywhere, and nowhere simultaneously, a deep, resonating hum that vibrated not just in the air, but in the very ground beneath her. It was subtle, almost a part of the forest's natural quiet, but once detected, it became impossible to ignore. It was the hum of Whisperwind Woods. And it had just begun. The last embers of the tiny fire pulsed, painting the inside of Lily's tent with dancing shadows. She'd built it small, just enough for warmth and a bit of light, not wanting to draw undue attention to her unauthorized expedition. Her sleeping bag, a vibrant cerulean, felt like a safe, soft cocoon as the chill of the early night began to seep through the thin tent fabric. Outside, the crickets had started their nightly chorus, a familiar symphony that usually lulled her to sleep. Tonight, however, their song seemed off. Not louder, not quieter, but somehow distorted, as if something else was subtly interwoven with their chirps. Then she heard it. A low, almost imperceptible hum. It wasn't the wind, nor the rustle of leaves. It was too steady, too resonant. Like a tuning fork struck softly in the distant, dense heart of Whisperwind Woods. Lily, ever the pragmatist, assumed it was a trick of the night, perhaps a distant electrical line or some peculiar nocturnal insect. She burrowed deeper into her sleeping bag, pulling the zipper up to her chin, her eyes fixed on the tent ceiling, where the faint glow of a sliver moon struggled to penetrate. The hum, however, refused to be dismissed. It grew, not abruptly, but with a creeping, insidious persistence. From a barely there vibration, it morphed into a tangible thrumming that seemed to resonate in the very bones of the earth. The crickets, as if sensing a new, dominant chord, began to quiet their song, their chirps becoming more sporadic, then fading altogether. Now, only the hum filled the air, a deep, pervasive note that felt less like a sound, and more like a presence. Lily pushed herself up, her heart giving a nervous flutter against her ribs. Her earlier certainty about a mundane explanation evaporated. This sound was alive, pulsating with an unseen energy. It wasn't just outside, it felt like it was inside the tent, vibrating through her very being. She reached for the small, waterproof flashlight she always carried, her fingers fumbling slightly in the sudden, oppressive quiet. A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, despite the cool night air. With a hesitant breath, Lily unzipped the tent flap a crack, just enough to peer out. The moon was higher now, casting an ethereal, silvery sheen over the surrounding trees. Their branches, usually a comforting sight, now looked like skeletal fingers reaching into the darkness. There was nothing. No flickering lights, no strange shadows moving amongst the undergrowth. Just the trees, the faint glint of dew on the leaves, and the overwhelming, droning hum. It was louder out here. A palpable pressure against her eardrums. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. A disorienting, all-encompassing vibration. It wasn't menacing, not exactly, but it was profoundly unsettling. It carried a strange, almost hypnotic quality, a low thrum that seemed to promise something vast and unknowable, just beyond the veil of night. Lily's curiosity, usually an unshakable force, warred with a prickle of genuine fear. She could feel the sound in her teeth, a low, buzzing ache. She snapped the zipper shut, the small sound echoing unnaturally in the hum-filled air. Retreating back into her sleeping bag, she pulled it completely over her head, muffling the sound only slightly. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, relentless hum. Every nerve ending felt alive, hyper-aware. The warmth of the sleeping bag, once comforting, now felt stifling, a tight enclosure against an unseen, omnipresent force. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to conjure the familiar image of her cozy bedroom, anything to dispel the growing dread that settled like a cold stone in her stomach. But the hum persisted, a lullaby of fear, promising a long, sleepless night. The oppressive hum, a vibration that had permeated her very bones for what felt like an eternity, finally ceased. It wasn't a gradual fade, but an abrupt, definitive cut, as if a colossal switch had been thrown. The sudden absence of sound was more jarring than its presence, leaving behind a profound, almost painful silence. Lily, who had spent the better part of the night balled up in her sleeping bag, hands clamped over her ears in a futile attempt to muffle the pervasive thrumming, slowly uncurled. Her muscles ached from the tension she hadn't realized she was holding, and her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. Outside the thin nylon of her tent, the world remained dark, though a faint, almost imperceptible lightening of the horizon hinted at the approaching dawn. The air inside the tent felt heavy, thick with the residue of the vanished sound. She swallowed, her throat dry, and slowly sat up, the crinkle of her sleeping bag sounding unnervingly loud in the sudden quiet. For hours the hum had been an inescapable torment, a low-frequency drone that bypassed her ears and resonated deep within her chest. It had made the ground beneath her feel alive, vibrating with an unseen energy. Sleep had been an impossibility, replaced by a restless, anxious state of hyper-awareness. Every rustle of leaves outside, every distant hoot of an owl, had been swallowed by the relentless thrum. Now only the chirping of crickets, tentative at first, then growing in confidence, filled the void. A shiver traced its way down her spine, not from cold, but from the lingering unease. What was that? Her mind raced, sifting through every possibility, dismissing them all. It wasn't wind, not an animal, not a generator. This was something else, something unnatural. The sheer persistence of it had been terrifying, the way it had seemed to pinpoint her, to burrow into her consciousness. Yet beneath the layers of fear, a new sensation began to surface: curiosity. She pushed aside the flap of her tent and peered out. The eastern sky was now a soft bruised purple, gradually bleeding into streaks of rose and gold. The trees, previously indistinguishable shadows, began to reclaim their individual forms, their branches etched against the burgeoning light. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It was a perfectly ordinary dawn, utterly incongruous with the bizarre auditory assault she had just endured. Lily crawled out of the tent, her movements stiff. The ground beneath her felt solid, unyielding, no longer a vibrating membrane. She pressed her bare palms against the cool earth, searching for any residual tremor, but found none. It was as if the hum had never been there, a figment of her sleep-deprived imagination. But the memory was too vivid, too visceral. Her hands still trembled slightly. She walked a few paces, her gaze sweeping across the campsite. The other tents remained still, silent. Had anyone else heard it? Or was it just her? The thought sent another wave of unease through her. To be the sole recipient of such a phenomenon felt isolating, almost like a burden. As the first slivers of direct sunlight touched the highest branches of the trees, bathing the clearing in a golden glow, Lily felt a profound shift. The fear, though still present, began to recede, replaced by an urgent need for answers. This wasn't just a strange occurrence, it felt significant. The hum hadn't just been a sound, it had been a presence, an undeniable force that had touched her. She looked back at her tent, then out at the awakening forest. The silence of the dawn wasn't empty. It was pregnant with possibility, with untold secrets waiting to be unearthed. Whatever had happened, it had changed something within her. The world felt larger, more mysterious, and she, Lily, was no longer just a camper, she was a witness. And the witness now had questions. Lots of them. "All right, gather round," Uncle Ben said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows that stretched and shrank like restless spirits. That first one was just an appetizer. This next tale, this one's about what happens when the very ground beneath your feet decides to play tricks. It's about a place where even the sun struggles to find its way. He leaned forward, the firelight glinting in his eyes. This story features three friends, much like you lot, out for an adventure. There was Tom, the self-proclaimed expert, always with a map and a compass, even if he sometimes read them upside down. Then there was Sarah, the quiet observer, who noticed things others missed, like the way a shadow shifted, or a bird's call changed. And finally Mike, bless his anxious heart, who saw danger lurking behind every rustling leaf, but who, when the chips were down, would be right there with you. A gust of wind rustled the distant leaves, making the new listeners huddle closer. They were exploring the redwood forest, a place of ancient giants, where the trees stretched so high they seemed to touch the heavens. Uncle Ben continued, his voice painting a vivid picture. Tom naturally had planned their hike down to the minute. They were going to follow a well-marked trail to a specific grove of ancient redwoods, have lunch, and be back before dusk. Sounded simple enough, right? He paused for dramatic effect, letting the question hang in the air. They started off with all the confidence of youth. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Sunlight dappled through the colossal canopy, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. Tom, of course, was leading the way, compass in hand, occasionally calling out facts about the flora and fauna, though half the time he was probably just making them up. Sarah walked a little behind, her eyes tracing the intricate patterns of bark, occasionally picking up a fallen leaf or a curious stone. Mike, meanwhile, kept glancing over his shoulder, convinced he'd heard something just behind them, or that a branch looked suspiciously like a crouching beast. Uncle Ben chuckled, a low rumble from his chest. Everything was going according to Tom's grand plan, until it wasn't. They'd been walking for what felt like hours, the massive trunks rising around them like the pillars of some forgotten temple. The light had begun to dim, not because the sun was setting but because the canopy above had become so dense, so interwoven, that it was like walking through a perpetual twilight. The air grew still, the sounds of the outside world muffled by the immense silence of the forest. "Are we sure this is the right way, Tom?" Mike asked, his voice a little reedy. He stopped, peering into the gloom ahead. "This path, it's getting really faint." Tom, ever the leader, pulled out his map, squinting in the dim light. "Of course it is, Mike. It just gets less trafficked here. We're almost there, I can feel it." He tapped a spot on the map with a confident finger, though Sarah noticed his brow was furrowed just slightly. But Mike was right. The narrow dirt track they had been following, though indistinct in places, had at least been discernible. Now it was as if the forest floor had simply swallowed it whole. The undergrowth thickened, ferns unfurling their fronds across where the path should have been. Roots, gnarled and thick as a man's arm, snaked across the ground, forming treacherous obstacles. "Tom, wait," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. She knelt, brushing aside some moss. "Hittes, the markers. They're gone," Tom scoffed. "They probably just ran out of paint, Sarah. It's a wilderness trail." But he knelt, too, and the confident air around him began to fray. The occasional painted blaze on a tree trunk, their only real guide, had indeed vanished. They were surrounded by an endless expanse of identical-looking colossal trees, their crowns lost in the perpetual twilight. A sudden, unnatural chill permeated the air. The vast silence of the forest, once merely profound, now felt oppressive, as if it were listening. The already dim light seemed to fade even more, the surrounding trees blurring into an indistinct, dark wall. It was as if the sun had simply given up, leaving them stranded in a premature, unsettling dusk. "Okay," Tom said, his voice a little too loud in the sudden silence. He spun slowly, his gaze sweeping the indistinguishable trunks. "Okay, no problem. We'll just backtrack. We just came from that direction," he pointed vaguely. But that direction looked exactly like every other direction. The forest had closed in around them, a labyrinth of ancient wood and shadow. There was no longer any discernible path, no familiar landmark, just towering, silent giants, pressing in from all sides. Mike let out a small, choked sound. "Tom, the sun. It's gone. It's too early!" And he was right. The light, which had been fading gradually, now seemed to have simply been extinguished. It wasn't night, not truly, but the forest had plunged into a deep, unsettling gloom that felt far more absolute than any natural dusk. They were lost, truly lost, in the heart of the redwood forest, with an inexplicable darkness descending around them. The dying campfires snap and hiss, once a comforting heartbeat against the encroaching night, now merely amplified the profound silence. That silence was punctuated only by the frantic tap of Mike's nervous foot against the damp earth. Tom, midway through an undoubtedly embellished tale of wilderness prowess, had abruptly fallen silent. A subtle shift in the air had caught his attention. Sarah, ever perceptive, noted his sudden stillness. "What is it, Tom?" she whispered, her voice a stark contrast to their earlier boisterous banter. He raised a hand, a universal gesture for quiet, his gaze fixed on the impenetrable wall of trees beyond the fire's weak glow. "Did you hear that?" Mike's anxious rhythm ceased. "Hear what?" "My stomach growling." He attempted a weak laugh, but it withered in his throat. The forest, so welcoming hours ago, now felt like a living entity, pressing in, its breath cold and damp. Then they heard it. A rustling, not of leaves in a breeze, nor the scurry of small nocturnal creatures. This was heavier, more deliberate, a dragging sound through the undergrowth, as if something large and sinuous moved just out of sight. It wasn't continuous. Pauses punctuated its progress, each sound sending a fresh wave of dread through them. "It sounds substantial," Sarah murmured, pulling her knees closer. Her artistic eye, usually discerning beauty, now perceived only menacing shadows dancing at the periphery of their vision. Tom, despite a tremor in his voice, tried to project calm. "Probably just a deer. Or maybe a bear. They're more scared of us than we are of them." He shifted, grasping the heavy branch he'd designated a makeshift poker. It felt woefully inadequate. Mike whimpered. "A bear, Tom. Bears don't sound like they're dragging a full-size sofa through the woods." His wide, glassy eyes darted around, seeking the source of the unsettling noise. The rustling stopped. The ensuing silence was even more terrifying than the sound itself. A listening silence, a predatory pause. Every muscle in their bodies tensed. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken fear. Then, sharp and sudden, a branch snapped with a report that echoed through the otherwise still forest. It was too loud for an accidental break, too deliberate for a casual step. It sounded like immense force had been applied. And then, the growl. It was low, guttural, a sound that seemed to vibrate in their very bones rather than merely register in their ears. It was a sound of ancient power, of raw, untamed hunger, not the bark of a dog, nor the rumble of a bear. This was deeper, more resonant, carrying an undeniable hint of malevolence. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, enveloping them in its terrifying presence. Mike let out a strangled cry, scrambling backward until his back hit the cold trunk of a tree. He pulled his thin blanket over his head, a futile attempt at protection. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the darkness from which the sound had emanated. Her usual composure had shattered, replaced by a raw, primal terror. Tom, for all his bravado, felt a cold dread trickle down his spine. The analytical part of his mind, usually so active, had simply shut down. This wasn't a deer, or a bear. This was something else, something far more sinister. He instinctively pulled Sarah closer, his arm wrapping around her, a futile gesture against the unseen threat. They huddled together, three small figures against the vast, menacing blackness of the forest. The growl still vibrated in the air, a chilling promise of what was yet to come. The campfire, once a beacon of warmth, now seemed to shrink, its feeble light battling in vain against the overwhelming shadow that pressed in from all sides. The snapping of twigs intensified, no longer just behind them but an encroaching rhythmic symphony. Tom refused to look back, his lungs screaming with each fiery gasp. Sarah, a muted presence beside him, blurred through the deepening gloom, her hand a lifeline in his own. Mike stumbled, a soft whimper escaping him, yet propelled forward by the same primal terror that gripped them all. "This way!" Tom rasped, dragging Sarah left, away from the forest's exposed floor, and toward a denser thicket he vaguely recalled from the map. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every rustle of leaves a direct menace. The cold tendrils of dread coiled around his heart, squeezing. His earlier bravado had dissolved like mist, leaving only the fierce instinct to survive and protect Sarah. Then, through a gap in the gnarled pines, a darker silhouette against the moonless sky. Not a tree, a structure. Small, crooked, little more than a shack, yet undeniably a cabin. A fragile, desperate hope flickered within him. "Inside!" he bellowed, his voice raw. They burst through the dilapidated doorway, the hinges groaning, the flimsy frame vibrating with their impact. The air within was heavy, with damp earth and decay. It was minuscule, barely allowing them to stand, but it offered walls, a roof. Shelter. Tom slammed the door, fumbling for a latch, a bolt, anything. There was only a rusted hook that threatened to crumble at a breath. He leaned his entire weight against the flimsy wood, his heart a frantic bird against his ribs. Sarah leaned against the far wall, her face ashen, eyes wide and fixed on the door. Mike had collapsed into a fetal position, his face buried in his knees, small, broken sounds escaping him. Outside, the forest fell into an unnerving silence. The snapping, the rustling, the distant chilling howl, all ceased. The sudden quiet was more terrifying than the noise, the quiet of something listening, waiting. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Tom remained pressed against the door, every muscle tensed, listening to Sarah's ragged breathing, Mike's choked sobs, and the frantic beat of his own heart echoing in the cabin's suffocating stillness. Then, a sound. A slow, deliberate scrape against the outer wall. Heavy. Not a branch, not an animal, too precise. It was circling. Sarah let out a small, strangled whimper. Mike whimpered louder, his body shaking uncontrollably. Tom squeezed his eyes shut, picturing the unseen intelligence moving, calculating. The scraping continued, a steady, relentless drag that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the cabin. It passed the window, a fleeting, dark shadow. Then, it reached the door. A pause, a held breath, and then, a thud, hard. Not a push, but a deliberate impact. The door shuddered, the rusted hook rattling in its loose eyelet. Tom bit back a yell, digging his heels into the dirt floor, pushing harder, as if his meager weight could withstand the monstrous force from the other side. The thud came again, and again, a sickening rhythm promising eventual collapse. Each impact resonated through his bones, a direct assault on his sanity. He heard the wood splintering, tiny creaks and groans that sounded like a death rattle. This went on for hours. The thudding would cease, only to be replaced by a soft, almost imperceptible scratching at the window pane, like long, sharp nails dragging across the glass. Or a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very air, chilling them to the bone. Sometimes, it would pace, its heavy footsteps audible, circling the cabin, as if probing for a weakness, a way in. Sarah was huddled beside him now, her hand gripping his arm so tightly his fingers tingled. He felt her trembling. Mike remained in the corner, silent now, perhaps lost to terror. Tom dared not look away from the door. His eyes burned, sleep, an impossible luxury, every fiber of his being focused on the singular, terrifying truth. The cabin was their sole barrier, and the creature outside refused to yield. Not yet. The first sliver of dawn, a faint grey ghost in the cracks of the cabin walls, was the most beautiful sight Tom had ever seen. As the light grew, the sounds outside diminished, finally ceasing altogether. They were still alive. For now. Lily and Whisperwind Woods. That's a different tale, Uncle Ben murmured, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial register. He hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze sweeping over each of us, assessing our readiness. The dying embers flickered, catching in his eyes, making them glint like wet slate. Tonight, though, I'm going to tell you about Blackwood Lake. A shiver traced its way down my spine, despite the fire's warmth. Blackwood Lake. The name alone felt laden with a certain dread. We'd passed it that afternoon, a dark, still expanse nestled within the shadowed mountain folds. Even under the sun, it had exuded an ancient, watchful presence. Uncle Ben took a slow, deliberate breath, the air around us growing taut with anticipation. This was about 20 years ago, before I met your Aunt Carol. I was quite the wilderness seeker back then, always after the most remote, untouched spots. Blackwood Lake perfectly fit the bill. No marked trails, just a rough, overgrown path that vanished into the thickest part of the forest. It took me a full day of bushwhacking just to reach its edge. He paused, allowing the woods, silence to press in. The distant hoot of an owl underscored the isolation he described. I set up camp right by the water, a small clearing barely large enough for my one-man tent. The air hung thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Only the rustling of leaves and an occasional fish jumping broke the quiet. It was perfect. Or so I thought. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped him. I spent the first day fishing, reading, just soaking in the solitude. The sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples before fading to an inky black. The stars, out there away from any city glow, were something else entirely. Like spilled diamonds on black velvet. His voice softened, the casual tone replaced by a solemnity that made my heart thrum. I crawled into my sleeping bag around midnight, or maybe a little after. The fire had dwindled to glowing coals, the darkness was absolute, a heavy shroud. I was almost asleep, drifting in that hazy space between wakefulness and dreams, when I heard it. He stopped, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if reliving the moment. My breath hitched. A splash, he finally continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Not a fish, this was heavier, like something substantial dropping into the water. I figured it was a deer, perhaps, coming down to drink. But then, a few seconds later, another. And another, a steady cadence. He tapped his index finger against his knee, a slow, deliberate beat. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the center of the lake, Uncle Ben explained, his eyes wide, reflecting the dying embers. Not near the shore, right from the very middle. And it wasn't random, it was purposeful, like someone or something was methodically moving through the water, each splash distinct, powerful. It was too dark to see anything, but the sound, it filled the silence. It echoed across the surface of that black water, each ripple vibrating through the ground right to where I lay. His voice dropped again, barely audible above the crackling fire. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter, my heart hammering against my ribs. Logic suggested an animal, a large one, maybe a moose. But a moose wouldn't be making such precise, regular splashes in the exact center of the lake, in the dead of night. And the sound, it wasn't the thrashing of an animal. It was rhythmic, almost like someone swimming, but with an immense, unnatural power behind each stroke. He leaned back, shadows dancing across his face. The splashing continued, for what felt like hours, always from the center, always that same deliberate, powerful rhythm. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, it wasn't alone. And it wasn't just swimming. Quote, the campfire's warmth was a transient comfort as its flickering light carved shifting behemoths from the surrounding pines. Uncle Ben, his eyes holding distant horrors, cradled a cooling mug. The autumn chill had already burrowed deep, but it was a more profound, existential cold that truly held him captive. Blackwood Lake, he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. That's where it happened. Right after I finished my dissertation, needed a break from all that dusty academia. Thought a week of solo camping would clear my head. He paused, a shiver raking his frame despite the fire's embrace. First few days were idyllic. Fishing, hiking, the usual backcountry bliss. Then, on the third night, it began. A faint luminescence, like a trapped firefly, only it wasn't. It emanated from the lake's very depths. He gestured vaguely toward the unseen water, a nervous tick twitching at his temple. I rationalized it away, an odd reflection, perhaps a passing boat with an unconventional underwater lamp. But it reappeared the next night, and the next, precisely at midnight, and it was amplifying. A palpable dread thickened the air between us. Curiosity, you see, is a potent, perilous force. It gnaws, whispers seductive promises of revelation. By the fifth night, the glow was unmistakable, a pulsating emerald heart, beneath the water's inky cloak. It resonated, a primal summons to witness whatever alien splendor or terror lay concealed. Uncle Ben cinched his well-worn woolen blanket tighter, as if fending off a lingering spectral chill. I gripped my most powerful flashlight, though I knew it was futile against such depths. The moon, a sliver of ice in the velvet sky, offered scant solace. Each step toward the shoreline was a wrestling match between an urgent need to comprehend and a primal instinct to bolt. The earth beneath my boots yielded softly, damp and fragrant with pine needles and decay. The crickets, usually a soothing lullaby, now chirped an unnerving chorus of whispers. He reached the water's edge, the lake's gentle lapping against the shore a symphony of hungry sighs. The air throbbed with a low hum, initially imperceptible, but steadily intensifying, becoming a physical pressure against his eardrums. Then he saw it. Not a faint glow, not a distant shimmer, but a concentrated, piercing luminescence. Directly below the surface, a sphere of pure, unearthly green light, roughly the size of a small car, pulsed with an unnerving rhythm. It swelled, then contracted, sending tendrils of sickly green light outwards, briefly illuminating the murky depths, revealing only impenetrable blackness beyond its immediate corona. It wasn't merely glowing, it was alive, and it was impossibly deep, yet its brilliance pierced the water, as if the lake itself was spun glass. A profound dread, unlike any he'd ever known, seized him. This wasn't the fear of a wild animal, or of being lost. It was the terror of the utterly unknown, of a fundamental discordance with the natural order. The pulsing light seemed to draw him in, yet every fiber of his being screamed for escape. This was no trick of light, no peculiar fish, no exotic geological phenomenon. It was an intelligence, an alien presence, radiating an ancient, malevolent power. He felt its scrutiny, a silent, penetrating gaze that pierced his very soul. Panic, raw and guttural, erupted, The hum intensified, a high-pitched whine threatening to shatter his eardrums. Without conscious thought, he spun on his heel and fled. His feet pounded the ground, a desperate, clumsy sprint through the uneven terrain. Branches whipped his face, roots snagged his boots, but he never faltered. The image of that pulsating green orb was seared into his retinas, a phantom light scorching his vision, even in the absolute blackness of the woods. He burst into his campsite, fumbling at the tent zipper, his hands trembling so violently he could barely unlatch it. Inside, he tore through his gear, stuffing everything haphazardly into his duffel bag. The sleeping bag, the cooking stove, the books, they were all just obstacles. He didn't bother with folding, didn't care for organization. His only thought was escape. The metallic tang of fear filled his mouth. He could still feel the low thrum of the light, vibrating in the very ground beneath his feet, a chilling reminder of its proximity. His old pickup truck coughed to life on the first try, a small miracle in itself. He flung the gear into the bed, not even bothering to secure it. The tires spun on the gravel as he slammed the accelerator, kicking up a cloud of dust. He didn't look back. He drove through the night, the winding forest road a blur, the green light a persistent afterimage in his mind's eye. He drove until the sun rose, painting the distant hills in hues of rose and gold, until the gas tank neared empty, and until the phantom hum in his ears finally subsided. Uncle Ben finished his coffee, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. I never went back to Blackwood Lake, never will. And every time I see a light, any light, reflecting off water at night, I see that green pulse. It's always there, just beneath the surface of my memory, a constant reminder that some things are better left undisturbed. He shivered again, a deep, lasting tremor that had nothing to do with the night air. Some curiosities, you see, come with a price. Quote.